So Cabinet has this week adopted a national framework that basically will work towards the professionalisation, always struggle with that word, of the public service. There have been calls over the years to professionalise the public sector better in order to get the optimal level of service delivery and indeed quality of work. The Democratic Alliance has in the last 24 hours claimed credit for this moment. Let's speak to the DA's Dr Leon Schreiber, who's joining us this afternoon. Doctor, very good afternoon to you. For those not in the know, why do you feel this is the DA's moment of glory?
Good afternoon, Tim, Bikila, and to your viewers as well. Well, I think many viewers would be aware that the DA has really intensified our campaign against cadre deployment over the last couple of years. We have exposed the minutes of the ANC's National Cadre Deployment Committee to, for the very first time, show how this committee actually operates in influencing appointment decisions. We submitted evidence to the Zondo Commission. We've submitted an end cadre deployment bill to Parliament. And, of course, we are currently engaged in 2 different court cases against the ANC over this particular matter. So when it comes to this framework policy on professionalisation, there was a first draft version that was actually published in 2020, which was really, frankly, quite a laughable document. It skirted around the major issues about interference in appointment processes, and the DA subsequently also made a number of inputs in that regard. So we are really pleased to see that that has now landed 2 years later, to the extent that this document explicitly says that cadre deployment must be ditched in favour of merit-based appointments. That is something we've been calling for a very long time.
But that's a bit of a stretch, does it not? Because in the language of this framework, it does not mention cadre deployment. It speaks to this. It says here that basically the framework at this point will look to create a transformed, professional, ethical, capable and developmental public sector. So to say it's the ANC saying it's no longer going the cadre deployment route would be a stretch.
That, unfortunately, I think we're speaking from 2 different hymn sheets on that, if that's the case, because I have the document right in front of me, and if you'll allow me to just quote from it. So this is the National Framework Towards Professionalisation of the Public Sector, and on page 63 it says, quote, "Recruitment and selection practices based on deployment have gained notoriety which have spawned cynicism. Some even questioned their constitutionality related to the principle of equality, and they may have a point if deployment practices are to be looked at from the perspective of Section 1973 of the Constitution. The recommendation is that deployment practices ought to be ditched in favour of a merit-based recruitment and selection system." So that is what the document says on page 63. And there's also a very clear policy directive later on to departments like public service, like cooperative governance, like public enterprises, to actually implement this particular recommendation. But I think what is interesting is that the government did not mention this. Yes,
if I may come in there, but that does not mean that the ANC will not deploy its cadres. It may just mean that what it'll do now is it'll deploy better qualified or more appropriately qualified cadres. So there will be deployment of cadres, just not, for example, shall we say, a random selection based on rank, but rather a cadre who, let's say, is deployed to health because they've got a related degree. So that is still cadre deployment, would it not be?
Yes, so I think that that's a bit of a separate point. If I may just finish this by saying the government policy, so that which was approved by Cabinet on the 19th of October, does in fact say what I've just quoted to you about cadre deployment needing to come to an end. So it's interesting that the government didn't communicate this particular bit of information until the DA obviously held our presser yesterday. On your second point, you are correct that the ANC may very well, in spite of this new policy framework, continue with its cadre deployment committee to influence appointment decisions. So that is why the court case that we are pursuing in January of next year is very important and comes into picture, because if we win that case and we get this practice to be declared unconstitutional, that will then also force the ANC to get in line with what is now this new government policy.
Dr. Schreiber, I would have loved to talk to you further about this, but we do have to leave it there for now. We'll hopefully be able to have you on for a better conversation at another time. Thank you so much.